That really good when that noise.
Clinking.
Yeah. Oh, how was it?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Lexington Park Library. I'm Amy Ford. I'm the branch manager here at Lexington Park Library. I'm so pleased to see everybody who could be here in person as well as at home on Zoom. So if you're interested, please catch the recap on our YouTube channel. It's available on our website. Okay, so I can send that out to all the attendees as well after the program. So we're here to welcome Donald Barber, David Brown, and Janice Walthour as they are talking about the Barber family from slavery or segregation and the civil rights movement, 4 generations in St. Mary's County. So this is a local history, and we are so pleased to have folks come in to talk about history here in St. Mary's County. So welcome, and Donald, I'll let you kick it off.
Okay. As you said, just want to thank everybody for coming. I'm here, and I actually got the idea to write the book in conjunction with Dave from just doing several oral histories down at Sodderly. I was born and raised at Sodderly and spent the first 16 years of my life living there. My father was born and raised at Sodderly. We talk about the slavery aspect. His grandmother was a member of the Dyson family, and they were enslaved at Sodderly. And he knew her, and she was. They all lived together in different locations around Sodderly. I mean, when you think of Sodderly now, you come straight down Vista Road and you drive onto the grounds. But back in those days, Sodderly was much larger, and it encompassed a good part of Vista Road at that time. And there's a let's see, there's a house on think about Vista Road, it's just a lot of woods. But on the other side of the woods from Sodderly, there's a house that sits there, and that's where my father grew up. When he married my mother, who was a member of the Somerville family from Hollywood, they at first lived in that house. That's where they began their family. My father actually left a contingent of people from African Americans from the Hollywood area. Somehow ended up in New Jersey. I'm not even sure how that happened. And he lived in New Jersey for a time, and he did road construction and just general construction work. And then he returned. Well, my father actually left Sodderly when his mother died. They didn't have any kind of a way. People didn't really do wills back in those days, particularly African Americans. You just pass things on to the oldest or whatever. But when his mother died, it was like there was no possibility of him living with his father. They were just like he was 12 years old and he left because he always used to tell us when I was a child, I was a man at the age of 12. He had to leave and go several states away and lived on his own. And it made him, well, what happened was after his mother passed away, he overheard his older siblings arguing about who had to take him because my grandmother died in childbirth. So they had an infant and then they had several children. And then my father was like 12 years old. So he was upset by the interaction that he heard and he just left. Said he went to, he just headed towards DC and ended up bypassing DC and going all the way to New Jersey. So He lived his early life there. He worked, like I said, construction work, road construction. It was a real, I would say, harsh life. But the interesting thing about my father is his harsh life made him a more gentle person because he was definitely one of the most gentle people I had ever met, and he was one of the strongest people I had ever met. But he was strong enough that he had nothing to prove, so he didn't have to act tough or have any outward displays of toughness. He was just very kind and gentle. He was a very good man. Um, and my experiences with him and my mother, who was probably the world's strongest advocate for education, um, shaped my future. They both believed that how far you would go in life depended on how much of an education you had. And I think their experiences were different than the average African American person in the county because they were in an environment that included very wealthy white people and then working class white people. And they saw that the wealthy white people treated the working class white people as bad or worse than they treated the African Americans. So they figured that the road to self determination and self respect traveled through education. So we went to they had free public schools and they sent us to school and went to school. They had I have six brothers and sisters, and all of us graduated high school. Um, and four of us have college degrees, and the other three just worked in civil service. Raised their families, and none of us grew up. None of us remained on Sodley after we grew up. That was one of the uh, strongest things in our family was that when you graduated from high school, you left Sodley. Because I remember when I graduated from high school, my graduation gift was a suitcase. You pack it up and go. So it was no question you were staying around there. Now, like I said, later in life, my mother had a series of strokes, and I returned to St. Mary's County to look after her, and so she could live with me. And plus, I got married. I just decided to stay here. so, so here I am today. And I thought, see, one of the things is when you experience something, it's kind of the environment. It's kind of your environment. And, you kind of assume that everybody's experiences are the same as yours. And I found over time that it was not true, that everybody didn't have the emphasis on education that was um, a characteristic of my family. So it was that's why I decided the book was a good idea because I thought I would spread it out into the community and let other people see what is possible, and how you're not like predestined. You can make your own choices and have more of a say in your own outcomes if you further educate yourself. So that's kind of the theme of the my contributions to the book.
Okay. Donald, thank you very much. I'm Dave Brownlee, Donald's co-author, and I, of course, didn't share any of his life experiences. I'm a Yankee who ended up owning a summer home in St. Mary's County near Sodderly, and I got involved there first as a docent and then doing some writing and then joining the board. And that's when Donald, we were colleagues on the board for a while. Uh, and I've always enjoyed writing stories about people, at least in my retirement years. And so when Donald and I were talking one day about his family, and it was very clear to me that he wanted to find a way to write the family story up, I jumped at the chance to help him do that. And I had found when I was at Solderly, not knowing very much about the African American experience here in the county, that being at Solderly had educated me quite a bit about the slavery part of that story. But I didn't really understand at all what it would have been like as an African American to go through the period of Jim Crow segregation down here in the county. And so I saw collaborating with Donald as an opportunity to educate myself on that and to try and draw out all the complexities of that. Now, obviously, this book doesn't claim to talk about the total Jim Crow experience here in the county. It looks at it entirely through the lens of how Donald and his ancestors experienced it. And if they didn't experience it, well, we didn't work it into the book. I'd like to make two sort of comments from a perspective about what the book represents, more than just the story of one family for 4 generations in St. Mary's County. The Jim Crow era ended, 1960, 1970, in that period, i.e. about 65, 70 years ago. So for most people living here in the county, black or white, they have no experience of that. And so I have seen this book as a way to record one family's perspective on that. The other thing is that in reading a lot about St. Mary's County since I came down here, I saw that there wasn't much written from an African American perspective. I spent a lot of time at the County Historical Society looking at their journal, the Chronicles, which they've kept going for now 70 years. It's an incredible accomplishment of a small historical society full of articles. And if you think about it, how many of those articles reflect an African American perspective? And the answer is probably, I haven't done a count, probably not more than a handful. So this book fills or starts to fill a void by focusing exclusively on the African American perspective. And I've learned from it, and I certainly hope that many other people do as well. Janice, would you like to make some comments?
Yes, thank you. But Donald asked me to get involved and to kind of talk about and to kind of set the stage too for those of us that have read it and that are planning to read it. And it tells the story of the lives and contributions that the 4 generations of the Barber family made to Sodom and to the community as well. Their story portrays the challenges and opportunities African Americans face in St. Mary's County from emancipation through Jim Crow, as we've been talking about, and the civil rights movement to the present, as seen through the lives of this family, striving for education, for more self-reliance, striving for prosperity, and for fulfilling their lives, and for dignity. As we read the books, as we read the book, we can see that aspect of this family. Now, to put it in its proper context, in St. Mary's County during this era, we see the challenges and opportunities that African Americans face from emancipation through Jim Crow. And it kind of helps us understand the importance of education to African Americans and their relentless pursuit of education. We see the family as self-reliant, prosperous, always seeking to move forward in the never-ending quest for fruitful living, and of course, for dignity and high self-esteem. And all of this was connected, as you look in the book, to their spirituality and faithfulness in their religious practices and beliefs, being Catholics, going to St. John's Catholic Church there in Hollywood. Now, Donald and I both belong to an organization called the Unified Committee for Afro-American Contributions, UCAC. And we wrote a book, In Relentless Pursuit of an Education. I hope I don't lose everything, trying to pick it up so you can. Yeah. This is the book, and it talks about African-American stories from a century of segregation. And we have some of the authors in here right now, authors of the book right here. And so this book really does give some context to the Barber family's story. And as I said, Donald was president for a short time and was on the committee. And the purpose of the UCAC, or the mission, is to document, to increase understanding of and foster African-American contributions to the history and development of St. Mary's County, while advocating for improvements in health, education, and community building for all citizens of St. Mary's County. Now, Don and David have both certainly joined them in that mission to document and tell the story of the Barber family. And as Dave said, there wasn't much history, or there isn't much history, but I think we're doing better at this juncture, doing much better. And this book, In Relentless Pursuit of an Education, really does have some of the, as I said, stories that the Barber family experienced. Now, St. Mary's County has been historically, as you'll find some of this information in the Relentless Pursuit, one of the most southern counties in Maryland. I didn't know I lived in the South, but obviously I do. And especially with these racial attitudes. And this is reflected in, right now, we have about 14% of the county is African-American. But during the era that we're talking about with Sodderly and with Donald's family, majority of the folks in this county were African-Americans. And that's been the history of the county. But I said they left during the Great Migration, I call it. And that was after slavery ended. The folks said, I'm getting out of here. I might have to, knowing this southern aspect of things that went on, I better get to DC. And they went to Baltimore, and they went to New Jersey, for fear of being enslaved. And of course, you had the farmers that were sharecroppers, another form of enslavement. You just had to pay now you had to pay to stay at the encampment and still work the farms. But Sodderly itself, there's more context to the story that the book talks about, was built in 1703. And it was a plantation that grew to become one of the largest plantations in the Chesapeake Bay region. And it was an economic hub of its own. Sodderly's Wharf on the Patuxent River saw the export of tobacco and corn and lumber, and produced by the enslaved population of the plantation. Of course, the enslaved population worked this plantation. The slaves did the work, the hard work there. And ships would arrive bringing in goods and transport. Of course, the luxury goods that kept the farm thriving and surviving were the enslaved people. The luxury goods were the people at that point in time. And of course, it was managed by a lot of different people, successful plantation owners. But eventually, the plantation income collapsed, and then with the outlawing of slavery in 1864. So, if you go there now, the buildings have been restored and the gardens is a beautiful spot to go, and they've really taken on a whole new challenge of making sure that the whole story is being told there. But as all of this is going on, the Barber family, those generations of people, what kept that farm going and moving. Um, of course, and as I said, when we hear the word plantation, we know that the bodies, there were some bodies that did that hard work to keep it moving. And Donald has talked about his parents and his great grands and all that worked there as well, where they came from. It talks about them coming from Upper Marlboro, Prince George's County, all across. But one of the things that was still very hard for African Americans to do was to get that education. And back then, when you think about education in St. Mary's County, of course, it was segregated after slavery. We had the 1- and 2-room schools across this county. And there was the Phyllis Wheatley School, which the family went to. That's where they grew their family. That was their school, Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley was a famous poet, African-American poet. I remember my teacher. Of course, I call myself an artifact because, Dave, I grew up during the era of segregation, went to the segregated schools, and some of us in here, Jackie, you probably did. No. Yeah. So we did in St. Mary's. George Washington Carver, which was Jarvisville, Banneker, which was the first African-American school or public school, which Donald's sister Phyllis and brothers went to Banneker School.
I went to Banneker.
And Donald went to Banneker before integration. Yeah, but the main school was the Phyllis Wheatley 1-room school, where his older brothers and sisters went to school. And of course, his mom, Miss Ruth, right?
Yes.
She actually went to Cardinal Gibbons when it was a boarding school, and Cardinal Gibbons Institute is the school for Catholics, parochial school, the first high school or institute for African American students. And your mom went there as a boarder. I think the book talks about somebody in the house could afford to send her to that school. And so, of course, it still exists today. It was doing it was back when Cardinal Gibbons Institute was built, it was modeled after Tuskegee Institute. It was the Tuskegee experiment in St. Mary's County, because the agriculture was really pretty bad, and the sharecroppers, the farmers had grown the land, and they needed to get things back on track. So the principal and the educators there wanted to try this experiment to see, so they had agriculture, but there was still that tug of war between the academics and the trades right here in St. Inigo's, Cardinal Gibbons Institute, where Mr. Ruth went to school. But of course, as I said, many of the folks still migrated back and forth, to other parts of the other states and to DC. And of course, I had one story that I thought of when I looked at the book. And of course, in the Catholic Church, even in the Catholic churches and church, Blacks sat in the back of the church, went to communion last. And what was very interesting was this church in St. George's Catholic Church, where my family went. We went at first to Immaculate Heart of Mary, which was pretty diverse and integrated back during that era. But we moved from Lexington Park and went back over to Valley Lee, which is where my mom is from. My dad was a civil service worker, so he got housing in a place called Carver Heights. When we left Carver Heights, we went back to Valley Lee and St. George's Catholic Church. Again, we weren't really used to it because Blacks, we sat where we wanted when we lived in the Lexington Park and Immaculate Mary area. But St. George's, they had Blacks sat in the back. Blacks went to communion last. But what was interesting is they had what they call pew rent. So names were on the pews. And I'm sure St. John's probably had that.
Yes, they
The
did.
names were on the pews. And so that was actually the lineup. You know, you said people sat in the back. I assume Blacks sat in the back because they couldn't afford pew rent. I just wonder if they could have, if they would have been moved a little further up in the church. I don't know.
There were these little tags on the back of the pews in front of you, and you would see the names of the people, and they lasted a very long time until they replaced those pews.
Yes, it did. It did. But this is what was going on in St. Mary's County. And of course, in that Barber family, they love to eat. John talks about the stuffed ham and all of the delicacies that, you know, the family would have. And again, the successes of his family is well documented. They had college graduates, mechanics, teachers, government workers, hospitality workers. Some people worked in the Pentagon. They had plumbers, social workers, and more. And and I always talk about his sister Phyllis. Phyllis is a good friend of my sister and me, but she was also my sister's roommate at Morgan State University. And she was very articulate and was a docent actually in Sauterley, in the big houses, I guess. Think about. But so there was a lot of information recorded and that connected up with, you know, whole era of from slavery to the civil rights movement. And I just hope that you know, we'll have more people to look at it and read it because it's well, I think it really is a book that will help the Black community and all citizens of St. Mary's County rededicate ourselves to the values that ended the eras of slavery and segregation through civil and human rights movements. As we continue on with our quest, we know that here we are again, sort of cyclical kind of movements in terms of dividing people and making a difference in, you know, your lifestyle and all of the things that challenge us today. And so books like this that Dave Donald wrote really tell you how families negotiated, how they got through it, and where they are today, that as they went through that era.
Are we ready to do some Q&A? Does anybody have any questions for our panel about our history? Ms. Thomas, let me give you the.
Where was the Phyllis Wheatley School? The Wheatley School?
That the road that leads straight from 235 down to Sauterley is, they call it Sauterley Road. The Phyllis Wheatley School is on a sharp bend on that road. You'll see it. It's about 3 miles from Sauterley.
The building still exists. It's a family
It's a
home,
home now.
family home now. It was, well, before it was the Phyllis Wheatley School, there was a one-room school and not on that property.
Mm-hmm.
But when the Barber family children were young, the old one-room school was torn down and a new school named after Phyllis Wheatley was put up on the same site.
But you could tell which house was the old Phyllis Wheatley School because the windows look different than what would be in a normal house. So you can still spot it when you go down the road. Yes. Mhm.
There's some pictures in the book too, and the religious pursuit.
I know of Village Weekly. What made them decide to name the school Village Weekly?
She was a noted poet.
I know that, but was she from this area? So they just decided to name it after her.
Yes.
Do you know the story of that, Janice?
No, I don't know that story, but I do know that she was very popular because in my fifth grade class, my fifth grade teacher at well, it was Jarvisville at that time. That was one of the notable poets that we learned about because we did get African American history in those in our school. We did.
Hello. So I am not from the area, but I live in Hollywood. And I've always been kind of interested in the history, but it's hard to find history on that little area. And so I just wonder in your lifetime and what stories you have from your ancestors, how has that area changed over the years? And also you talked about a lot of people, at the end of slavery and probably throughout Jim Crow moved away from the area. Are there a lot of original Black families still in that area, like in Hollywood and that surrounding area in Souderly, or have just a lot of people moved on? Because it seems now just more very suburban neighborhoods, groups of, so I just wonder what the area was like from what you know and what you've been told.
The area was quite different. First of all, there were many more Black families around at that time, but even myself, we were encouraged to go to DC, just head north. Now I went to Baltimore, but most of my siblings went to DC. And the other thing that was almost like flipping a light switch was the building of the Patuxent River Naval Air Station, because that changed a lot of the culture of the county, because it had a huge influx of people to build the base, and then they needed employees. So and they needed people that had a certain ability. Now, a lot of county residents of all races went to the Tucson River to work because they just needed labor to build it. It's a pretty large installation, and a lot of buildings and a lot of area. And it was a huge employer for the region. So before that, people worked for smaller farms, and then there was some retail, but not a lot. And there were a lot of little country stores scattered around. A lot of them still survive. They're not open anymore, but the buildings are still there. And that was the commerce that existed at that time with these little country stores. So the influx of individuals for Tucson River really changed the culture of the area. The larger stores were open in response to that influx of people.
Also Waterman.
Waterman, yes.
That was
Now, Waterman was a way that African Americans could have some autonomy. They could work on the water. You just had to have a boat. And I can remember being a kid and going to my uncle's boat. And I mean, that thing was like the leakiest thing in the world. And I just remember he had this thing you would pull and it would dump the water overboard. And you just had to keep doing it or you would sink. And it had like a car engine in it. And I just remember they had a drive shaft that came out the back of it that went to the back where the propeller was. And it was all these rags wrapped around it, soaked in grease. And that's how they were trying to make stop the water from coming in where the drive shaft went out. So it was not I mean, I can't swim. And and you really can't swim in 10-degree water, So it was a real risky proposition, but it was autonomy and you could make a living. So they would go out and oyster, and in the warm part of the year, excuse me, they would crab, and that gave them some cash because the farming was not a very lucrative occupation. The money all went someplace. It didn't go to you, and My first job I ever had as a child was working at Sodderly, and I made 50 cents an hour, and I was glad to have it. By the time I left there when I was 16, I was making $1.35 an hour. And I got a job working at Pax River, and I started at $1.60 and immediately got raised to $2.
Mhm.
It was like a night and day.
Could I add one little comment in response to this question? Population of St. Mary's County in the first US federal census was about 15,000. The population of St. Mary's in the 1940 census was about 15,000.
Mhm.
The base opened and it's been going up ever since. That gives you a sense that when they talk about agricultural fishing being the centerpiece of the economy, that began to change. The base had an incredible impact on this community.
I grew up in Hollywood, where Southerly is. It was Somerville's, the Scribers, the Barbers in that area.
All my cousins.
Yeah, Black families. But where I grew up on Hollywood Leonardtown Road, very few Black families there. And to this day, Hollywood is considered kind of a racist area. I'm on the planning commission, and they are building some townhouses on Myrtle Dean Road. The people were going crazy because they felt that it was going to be low income minority people was going to move in those townhouses. We got a lot of comments, me personally, from people that did not want to see that area with those townhouses there.
It just shows the amount of, it just shows the amount of inertia that you had to overcome for make any kind of a change. There's a lot of resistance.
I used to go to the Hollywood Fire Carnival. My family and very few Blacks were at that carnival. You weren't welcome very much at that carnival.
No, you're 100% correct about that. I never went to the Hollywood Carnival because I want to survive. It's about hole in the wall. Hole in the wall was worse because because I used to start running at that intersection there because I didn't want to be walking when I got to hole in the wall. So yeah, because when I work and hitchhike, catch a ride home, they drop you off right there at the intersection where it gets the Birchmark there now. I don't know what it's called now, but they would drop you off there, and I would just run. I would just run there, and then when I got past the hole in the wall, it's like a little dip right there. That's where I would stop running, and I got chased more than once. But I was a much lighter person at the time. I could run very fast, so I could outrun all my pursuers. Because those guys would pick up pipes and bottles and everything and chase you, and I would just run.
I would like to know, you mentioned the schoolhouses were not necessarily close by. So do you have any memories of, going to and from school and what distance that was? And could you describe that?
Okay. Excuse me. In the northern part of the county, which Hollywood's really the central part of the county, we went to Banneker, and the school bus ride was very long. Get up early in the morning, get on the bus, and then it would just ride because the bus would pick up people. My school bus would pick up people right around Hollywood where I was. It would go down south on 235 to what they call Sand Gates. And then it would pick up people heading north from there all the way up to Oakville and then go the rest of the way to Banneker. So, and the other thing is, I was lucky to be a small child at the time because I could sit in people's laps. So that bus would be so full by the time it got to the end of its route, there was nowhere to stand because there was a white line on the floor at the front of the bus. And the bus driver would tell you to squish back because he wouldn't take off until there was nobody past that line. So we all had to squish back until there was nobody in front of that line, then he would drive off. It was a heck of an experience.
And for me personally, going to desegregated schools, we would have to live, we lived in Valley Lee. As I said, we lived in the area first where we could walk to school. But we would pass all of the white schools to get to what is now George Washington Barber. We, that was a regular occurrence, but we didn't have I don't remember the crowding on the bus. I think there was more than one bus that picked us up from our area. So for Banneker, it must have been just trying to jam all the kids on that one bus.
It was such a broad area
Yeah.
that was covered, so many kids on that bus. Yeah, I mean, nobody would stand for something that unsafe nowadays, but different day and age.
We moved from Washington, D.C. in the 60s and going to a school where it's almost predominantly Black and going to schools, Leonardtown Middle School and elementary school. The bus would pass us because we were the only Blacks that were getting on the bus in Hollywood. My dad would have to run the bus driver down and force them to stop to pick us up, but they would say, oh, we didn't see it. They seen us. They would just pass us. They didn't want us on the bus.
And Amy, my grandfather was a teacher. He was the first teacher at the Drayton one-room school, and he was a farmer. And on his farm, he had adopted a young man. He had already had 11 kids, but they adopted Edward. And they tell the story of how that the white students would come through the farm, my grandfather's farm, to catch the bus. And Edward had to walk to school, the one-room school at that point. And he would ask my grandfather, Papa, what is wrong? Why are they walking this, catching the bus? And we have to walk, and they walk through our property to get on the bus. And my grandfather said, I'll tell you about that later.
Wanted to say in the book, in our book, in Relentless Pursuit, there are really interesting stories about getting to school. And there are many people that went to school before there was a bus. And then there were many people that went to school before there was a bus for Black students. And when people talk about walking 5 miles to school and more, and they're hard to believe, but those, one thing that I'm glad that Jan said you talked about the book, but the other thing that's important is to realize that it's based on oral histories.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really told in the people who experienced it, it's told in their words. And I think that's a real strength.
Mm-hmm.
Man, when you went to school during segregation, now for African American students, or for each individual school meant for African Americans, was there, I don't want to say competition, but was there prioritization between different locations in the community, or did each school that had which community that had this Drayton, which one had the other school? Did they just simply put more inputs? Was there more efforts into those schools?
What they did was consolidate the schools because there were 1- and 2-room schools.
Right.
And then they just took all the students that went to these 1-room schools, shut the 1-room schools down. And like you said, they became people's houses.
All right.
And then they sent them to centrally located, segregated schools.
Okay.
But the whole thing was this whole consolidation.
Yeah.
So Banneker was a consolidated school. George Washington Carver was Jarvisville, was the southern area. And then the parochial school or Catholic school was Cardinal Gibbons, which Cardinal Gibbons was also a boarding school that his mom actually went to, because before they opened up the consolidated schools, they would bus I mean, they wouldn't bus. Students would come and live on the campus at Cardinal Gibbons Institute. So there was, but like Meredith said, some were at buses, some didn't, even boarding schools. But that was that whole idea, with the Barber family, education was very important to them. So, and I thought about that when we read about your mom, they just took that opportunity for her to go to school, and she was so adamant about her children getting an education and making sure that they were read to, even though in the book, she had some learning disabilities. So she was more that, I guess, adamant about making sure that her kids got it.
Guys mentioned Banneker School. And I just wanted to share that in 1925, my grandfather was one of the member of the United Parent Trustee Association to help establish and advocate for the Banneker Elementary School.
Men and women were in that association, but that picture you see is only the men.
But you talk about perceptions. My brother and I were the only African-American children on the bus when they first integrated the schools. And I remember he stayed home sick from school one day and they tried to kill me. Because there was only two of us. And then one being missing, they thought I was vulnerable. So I was swinging for the fences. The bus driver, because people talk about the bad experiences with the bus driver. My bus driver was an angel because she told me to come up and sit on that heater box where she sat. And I just sat up there. And that way I was able to make it home from school without any further assaults. It was a very unpleasant time. Because, they would say, like, the integration of schools was a major step forward, but I just looked at it like it was a nightmare because it was. It was when I was at Banneker, my sister Phyllis had graduated in June and I started that September. So she was the valedictorian. And I remember all the teachers from the high school side coming over to see me. And they were all so nice and friendly. And they were telling me, how pleasant it was teaching my older brothers and sisters, and that they all did very well and that they're looking forward to me doing well. It was just a very positive kind of family feel experience. And then when I went to Hollywood school, the teacher from Banneker had written in my record that I was an excellent student from a family of excellent students. For some reason, it just rubbed the teacher the wrong way. And she called me up in front of the class and berated me for having the nerve to think that I was equal to any of the white students there. So she was like, "You'll be lucky if you keep up." So it just strengthened my resolve, and I just continue to get my A's like I did before. But it was a very unpleasant experience. It was the beginning of me hating school. So before that, school was just just a real positive experience. That was a very negative experience. And, it tainted me for a good while because I was very angry. Not what I expected, not what I deserved.
Donald, I'd like to ask you to go on and talk about what happened the following year.
Oh,
When,
well, it wasn't the following year, it was the year. It was 2 years later, I was elected class president. Yeah. So,
in a predominantly white school.
well, like I said, it was like me and maybe 2 or 3 other
Right.
of my cousins in the class. Quickly evolving experience.
Oh, Ms. Barber, you had talked about you left St. Mary's County, went to Baltimore for a while. Like, how did your experience differ in the different environments?
Oh, see, I worked I worked locally, and I wasn't making any money at all. And my older brother got a job working at one of the major hospitals in Baltimore, and he said how much he liked it, and that I should come up there and apply. So I rode with him up there one day, and I turned an application, and the director of nursing asked me if I could stick around for a while. And I'm like, I got nowhere to go. So she told me to come back later that afternoon. Excuse me. They hired me on the spot. So I did like the Beverly Hillbillies. I loaded up the truck and I was gone. So I stayed up there, like I said, 3 years. I came home one weekend to visit my mother, and she couldn't finish a sentence. She would start a sentence and just trail off. And it was just shocking to me. So I said, I got to come back home. So that's why I ended up coming back. And then I had met Rosa, so I married her. And been here ever since. And happy to be here. But it was a very different experience living in Baltimore County. There was some extreme races there too, but it was close enough to Baltimore City that it was a lot of educated African Americans around. So it was a real mixture of individuals. And it was a good job. It was a good place to work. I had never worked at a place where the staff socialized to the extent that they did at that hospital, because we would work all day and then go out and party all night. The same, it'd be like just a group of people would just move over from the hospital to the bars. It was very much a fun experience.
Sounds like you were back in St. Mary's County.
Well, Mr. Barber, what else about your early experiences, like shaped your trajectory, and how did you develop after you came back to St. Mary's County?
Let's see now. When I came back to the county, I was pretty much grown, so there wasn't a lot of additional development. I from my just for an example, my father missed one day from work and it scared the crap out of my mother. She asked me to stay home from school. And she goes, because they call my father Barney. She goes, Barney never misses work. So something must be really wrong. So she asked me to stay home from school, which was completely out of left field. So I stayed home, and then I went down to just peek in the room, and I saw my father was sitting at the foot of the bed, bent over. And I asked him if he was all right. He said he was dying. So you have to excuse me. I was 14 at the time, so I drove to the hospital. And he never came home. But the thing I got from my mother and father's work ethic, because I won the perfect attendance award at work so many times, they stopped giving it. Because they said it wasn't for management staff, it was for the line employees, and it was no longer an incentive. So, because nobody could beat you, but because my mother and father, you say, if you're sick, go on to work, because you're not feeling well anyway, you might as well be at work. You're gonna be miserable. Go to work. So I would just go to work. And I married somebody that never missed work anyway, so he's hanging around the house.
It probably was standard procedure, but I remember people telling me story. St. John's Church. The whites were buried on the east side and the blacks were buried on the west side of the cemetery. They didn't bury them together. But that might have been standard, but this was new to me coming down. St. Mary, but they didn't bury people together.
We've got a question from one of our attendees online, and they'd like to ask, how can I find out if my great-great-great-grandmother was a part of the Dyson family mentioned? So she was a Dyson, and we're not sure if it was her maiden or married name. Do we have any answers about where we can find information on the Dyson family?
It's always good. You may not have any success, but it's always good to start at the Historical Society because they have a great deal of information there. I also think it's worth looking into let's see, well,
The Library of Congress.
yeah, I would just search the Library of Congress too, because churches online, it's just an amazing amount of information online. You can find connections.
There is a local genealogical society as well that is affiliated indirectly with the Historical Society. And there are people there, at both those institutions, who are quite good
Mhm.
At genealogical research. So
Yes.
So yeah, I listen to the stories and I listen to names and I think about places, and then you can start putting the family tree together. You start seeing patterns. There's naming patterns. It's the it's uh the year. The census is a great record and it's easy to access and it's free. Um, I use Ancestry.
Ancestry.com is a great resource.
Yes. And you know, I don't take clients. This is for my research. So some of my trees, you know, I go back and work on them to make sure, you know, I've got all the right things that go with it. But there's listening to the stories and knowing, being able to start recognizing family names and relationships is really important to figure out your clues and where to go next. Um, You'd be surprised how you get used to seeing, you know, who that has to be their cousin, you know, that where they live. But going back to the descendants too and asking those kinds of questions, where your family is. So there's a lot of family that were at Sodderly. It goes back to, you know, the 1700s. And that's how you do it. I love doing it. Not everybody feels the same way, but I love doing it. I love to find the stories and how people are connected.
Well, Mr. Barber, could you talk a little bit about your experience with Sodderly and the Descendants Project and your work in that way?
I've been very active in the Descendants Project because it's such an interesting group of people, and everybody that's involved in it is searching for information. So in terms of my family, we came to Sodderly comparatively late in the history of the site. My father's father came there in the 1870s. He was a free man when he came there, but his mother's family, the Dysons, they were enslaved at Sodderly, and they had been there much longer, had a much deeper roots there at the place. And the participation in the Descendants Project is very inspiring because people don't have a great deal of information, and you can link your Ancestry.com account to others and it expands your list of people that you're related to. Because I found out I was related to somebody I've been friends with forever and never knew that we were related. His roots went back to Sodley too. It's just a very interesting thing to see. Had no indication that he had any affiliation with Sodley whatsoever. It was very interesting to find that out.
Well, Jeannie Hurdle, who was speaking earlier, helped set that program up. And just to be clear, if you know of anyone in your family who had any kind of connection with Sodderly at any time, then you're a descendant and able to participate in that program.
What are maybe some of the surprising things that you've found out by working with the other descendants and doing more research?
Oh, like I said, ancestry.com is just a fountain of information. And everybody, not everybody, but most of my father's relatives are very dark skinned. And looking at ancestry.com, you finally uncover some white relatives, which I just think is hilarious. Now, my mother, her grandmother was half white. So that part of my family I was already aware of, but my father's family, I just they were just always very dark skinned, so I didn't realize they had any European blood at all. But that was one of the surprising things we found out.
This is kind of a random off the wall question.
That's kind of
Um, Janice, you mentioned earlier that the Barber family likes to cook and eat. So I was wondering, does your family have any recipes in 300 years of Black cooking? That you know
someone
of?
years ago did a book of recipes.
That's just 300 years of Black cooking.
Yes,
Mhm.
not me, but my mother has some in there. Yes,
Your mother's sister had one in.
yes, yes. Her name is Alice Ruth. So sometimes you see Alice, you see Ruth. But she was an excellent cook, and never wrote anything down. Never used a recipe. Say some of this and some of that. It'll be good. That's the way she cooked.
Her sister wrote some things down. So
Yeah.
her recipe got in the book.
Mhm. What were some of your favorites?
Oh, my mother made the best stuffed ham in the world. So, actually, my mother made she made stuff you wouldn't expect, like French toast. Because see, my mother cooked for the people at Sodley, they were millionaires. So she because we would have asparagus with hollandaise sauce. Just normally, and I just thought everybody ate that because it grew out in the yard. The hollandaise sauce is milk and eggs, and she would just whip it up in the pan on the stove and cook it in a double boiler so it wouldn't stick. It was freaking delicious.
My mother was one that had to go to DC to finish high school. And once she finished high school, she did domestic work as well and worked and cooked. And I can remember growing up, we had Brussels sprouts with walnuts, that kind of thing. So like Donald said, when you had Black folks cooking, moms had different recipes they used for the families that they worked for that you wouldn't expect, collard greens and ham pie.
Right. And there were a ton of fruit trees at Sodley. So we always had peach preserves and pear preserves and apple butter. And she would just make this stuff from scratch. And I just remember her going and putting the little sticks of cinnamon in each little jar when she made the they had fig trees. She would make fig preserves too. All that stuff was great because she would make a big box and I would take it down to college. Those kids would go nuts. I brought it in there, so we would share everything. And across the soft crabs and the crab cakes were always delicious.
Any other questions for our panel? Yes, ma'am.
So, how did your, what was the relationship, I guess, I don't, for lack of explaining it, to, it seems that your family were the more of the favorites, so to speak, as far as being able to eat, you know, a lot more well-to-do than some of the other hand workers on the farm. So what was the relationship, I guess, what I'm asking to, what do you think that some of the, like the Dysons looked, their perception of maybe some of the favoritism that your family may have experienced compared to theirs, or?
I wasn't aware of any kind of favoritism. My mother and father used to go to work in the morning before I got up and come home at night after I gone to bed. So yeah, it'd be days at a time I wouldn't see them. So I wasn't aware of any favoritism. They were some hardworking people. Now let's see. Oh, my father, because what happened was my father had a lot of skills. So he would fix the plumbing and fix the outlets, electrical outlets, was something went wrong. So it was just a matter of what you could contribute. I mean, and my mother, I just remember her shoes, the heel would wear this weird angle from her pushing the vacuum cleaner. So that was a hell of a lot of vacuuming to wear your damn shoes out. So, yeah, so I mean, they were hardworking folks. And as time went on, the worker population had solidly dwindled because the no, it was the economics were not good. So Sodley always had absentee owners. They weren't dependent on the farm for income, just kind of like hobby owning the house. So the economic status would go up and down, up and down. And it was just dependent on the employees to make things work as best they could. Because like I said, I remember at the time in the early 1970s, when my father died, I remember Mrs. Ingalls gave my mother one last check. It was $50 frickin' dollars. So my parents were excellent at stretching a dollar. They would stretch the hell out of a dollar. And you didn't have a lot of luxuries, and you make things last, and you live off the land. I mean, my father used to do a lot of fishing and crabbing, and that's what we ate. And then they had sheep at Sodley, and we would eat one or two of those. And, my mother, because I don't know if you guys eat much lamb, but this, so my mother could take lamb and garlic and make it into something freaking wonderful. So I wouldn't even want to try to eat it without garlic. They were just good at living off the land. And like I said, my mother made the best preserves in the world. And they had corn and different things they grew in the garden. And that's what we would live on, because it was there. You would buy some things at the grocery store. And there was an old guy named Howard Chase that lived over behind McKay's, and we called him the Egg Man. We would go to him and get eggs. That was just how people lived back in those days.
But Donald's sister Phyllis was treated sort of special by Miss Satterley. Was it Satterley?
Oh, Mrs. Ingalls.
Miss Ingalls, Miss Ingalls. Well, she, as I said, she was a docent, but she also would gave her graduation presents. When she graduated, when she got married, she gave her wedding presents. So she was very thoughtful about Phyllis. I don't know if she did that with the other other children? Or was it just Phyllis?
She gave me $75 when I graduated from high school, and she gave me $120 when I graduated from college.
Okay.
And you got to remember, she's a multi-millionaire. So
Well,
pocket change.
that's somewhat of an exaggeration. Because Mrs. Ingalls was responsible for Sotterly from 1948 till she passed away in 1993. And during those years, she was not gainfully employed. She was a wealthy granddaughter of J.P. Morgan, and she was living off declining
That's
wealth.
true. Yes.
So when she first was there, she had plenty of money to fix the place up. But by the time she left, it was in poor condition. When I say left, when she passed away.
I'm wondering what perspective you have on how your family's history, specifically at Sotterly, has impacted the rest of your family generationally. Because we talk about, people say slavery was so long ago and people should be fine now, but that generational trauma and also just the continued attempt to keep people in a certain place throughout different generations. How do you feel like your perspective is that has impacted your family through the generations here?
Through the generations, I think the strongest effect was go to school, get your education. You have a job, go to work. Don't. So some people can, everybody has people at work. They have coworkers that don't do a damn thing. Don't be that person. That was the strongest thing that just kind of washed down through the years. Is you have to be worth employing. The people are going to pay you. They want something for their money they're paying. You got to make sure it's your job to make sure they get it so that you stay employed. And by going to school and getting because they have free public schools. So if you go to school and get an education, then you're bringing something to the table. I think that's the strong. Oh, they always said you have to work twice as hard to make half as much. They always said that. Yeah.
Just curious, I've never heard what's Greenwell. Did you know if they had any slaves? Greenwell.
Greenwell State Park, where it is now. That was
The property's touch and pretty large.
yes.
I remember I was the first park ranger that they hired after the family gave it to the state, and I just never heard. But that's a big piece of property too. I was wondering.
Because I came along in the late 50s and the 60s. I just remember a lot of people worked for Dr. Greenwell. So he had people cleaning and doing yard work, so he had a hefty staff around there keeping the place up. That was kind of typical for the area because my uncles worked for the Dean family because they had farmland and they had the big house. They needed people to work there, so they were they weren't like Walmart and Sears and all those places that are around now. Back then, you just worked for a family.
So you have to remember too that part of what Greenwell State Park is used to be Sotterly too. So yes, there was slavery where Greenwell is.
Any other questions? Well, I want to really thank our panelists who have brought so much wealth of information to us today. uncovered a lot of the hidden history of St. Mary's County. We're so grateful that you could be here today. And for our folks in the audience, we also have a book signing following this presentation. So we would love for you to take a look at the Barber family book. Purchase one if you'd like yourself, because we have the authors right here to sign it for you if you'd like. Any last questions? We also have In Relentless Pursuit of Education available today as well. So thank you so much to our panelists. We really appreciate you being here.